Well, Robert, hello. Thank you so much for being on the Be Love podcast today.
Well, thank you, Sage. This is quite an interesting honor because we go back a ways.
Yes, we do go back a ways. I have danced at your Dead Sue concerts at convention when I was a young teen, and then followed you into the ministry. And I'm excited to see where this conversation might take us. Maybe you'll learn something new about you. Here, I'd love to, the purpose of this podcast is to just hear people's stories about how love has called them in life. Our Swedenborgian theology tells us we all have love at the core and a unique love. And so I'm curious, where might you like to begin that story for yourself?
Just for total clarity, I like to think that I am the first Swedenborgian you ever met.
So, okay, yes, let's go back even further. I honestly don't remember you at the Portland church. You might remember me better than I remember you, but yes, my mother I am a Swedenborgian today because she came to the Portland New Church. Do you remember what year that was?
That would be 1980, I believe 85, the spring. Yeah, oh my goodness, yeah. And she was looking for a church, and she had visited several others, and she came to the Portland church. And after the sermon, I gave a brief sermon. It was a small group, as you know. I said, well, what do you think? And that apparently stuck in your mother's mind, that a minister would even allow a free inquiry of thought on part of the parishioner, instead of just telling her what it is.
Yes. So I don't remember you as an 8-year-old, but she often tells that story that is why this church appealed to her. So my mother came to the church because of you. What was it that drew you into this Swedenborgian movement? What was that story?
My first 17 years were spent in a large Sicilian Catholic family in northern New Jersey. Lots of uncles and aunts, lots of cousins. I'm one of 7. And we did the whole routine, a lot of church all the time. And around 16, at the age of 16, I started to think for myself, which is what happens. And at the same time, my brother introduced me to philosophy, which helps you think as well, more clearly, challenges you to be honest and clear. And before I know it, I was off to Boston University, where an entire new world opened up to me. Not a small town, but a big city, not surrounded by one monolithic religious viewpoint, a lot of diversity and interesting things going on. Now, I got to BU on a scholarship, and I spent my first 2 years, just 1970 through 72, experimenting and sampling the counterculture that was so prevalent those days, and guitar, and discovering things like the Grateful Dead and LSD and more philosophy.
All three seem very intertwined.
Yeah,
Philosophy, LSD, music.
this is how we get to Dead Sue. I dropped out of college after 3 years, reading a lot of Hermann Hesse novels and wanted to be out on my own. Almost actually with the plan to move to Germany because it's my second favorite country and culture. But that didn't happen. And then what happened was I fell in love. I met someone and I fell in love. And she told me, I don't think so. As the conversation was very brief, and it ended with, I don't think so. With a wake up call for me. Because in the process of that whole episode, which maybe a few months, it dawned on me that people are the only real things in life. All this stuff comes and goes. It's unconscious. It doesn't care about us. We can get wrapped up in it, but obviously one day it's going to fade away and turn into something else. But people are this, locus of spiritual life, spiritual presence in the world, unlike the rest of nature, which is more or less, as I said, unconscious or moving by instinct. And we're moving by intention and decisions and consciousness. So that was what I got out of that. But it also led me to, at this point, I was back in New Jersey for a year after being demoted from BU. And then I returned to Boston a few days after my 21st birthday. I packed a suitcase, my acoustic guitar, and a paper bag with anything else I couldn't fit in the suitcase, got in a friend's car, and drove up to Boston, where I stayed with some friends on a couch for a few months, and then a small apartment with some other friends. So it was a little bit of an adventure. So I began to, focus on my guitar, tried to get some bands together, working day jobs, as they call them. And on March 3rd, 1977, I was working at Snyder's Army Navy store in Boston, in Copley Square. And I was out on my lunch break, and I was walking down Newbury Street, and I saw a sign, and it said, Swedenborg Library and Bookstore, Religion, Philosophy, Psychology. I said, boy, that sounds interesting. And I never heard of this guy. I thought I was
Yeah.
pretty well read. Never heard of this guy. Walked in, and Ray Gue, I don't know if you remember Ray Gue.
I never met him, but I heard a lot about him while I was in Cambridge.
He was the manager, and he was the only one there. And he said, go ahead and look around. I saw a book comparing Swedenborg to modern philosophy, and I took it home and I read it. And as they say, it blew my mind because here was something that was able to coordinate. Now, I wrote an article for, it's one of these why am I a Swedenborgian type of things. And when people ask me that, I say, well, my three influences were strong religious upbringing in Christian imagery, an interest in philosophy, which my brother defines as a ruthless and defenseless search for truth. Ruthless means you turn over every stone, and defenseless means it doesn't matter what you find. Don't take any personal what you find. Just keep going. And Grateful Dead. Now, when people hear that, they say, "Well, religion and philosophy, I can understand that, but what's the Grateful Dead got to do with this?" And so I say, with religion, you get this sense of divine presence in all things, especially from a Catholic perspective. With philosophy, you get this clear search for truth, be honest. And Grateful Dead, you get a new sense of freedom and community. They redefine what it was. You're not restricted in any way. You follow the music, you submit to the music, you follow it and you serve it, and it creates things that bring everyone together. So those
I
were
love that.
the three things that strongly influenced me. And so I began reading more Swedenborg, visiting the library for discussion groups, attending the Cambridge Church. Like I said, 1978, I started going there. And also in 78, I applied to the school, the seminary, and they said, this sounds great. You seem interested. You know what you're talking about. And where did you get your BA? I said, that's a funny thing. I never got a BA. And I can just remember them all folding their notebooks closed. There. Oh, well, in that case, you just go get a BA, come back and talk to us. And it turns out that they were very generous because this was September. It was too late to enroll in a regular school. So they let me attend a semester as a special student. Then I applied to UMass Boston the next January and did 2 years to finish my undergraduate degree, and then returned to.
Very cool. So they let you dip your toe in as you were expressing that interest.
It sounds like you're probably going to go through it, so let's get you started.
Yeah.
But with the commitment that I'm going to go back and finish my degree, which I did.
I love that. And I have to ask,
Yeah,
why do you remember that it was March 3rd? It's just stayed in your mind?
because I had to fill out the little card in the front to sign my name. $1 deposit, $1. My entrance fee, and you had to put the date. So I put 377, and that's an easy number.
I It's just a wonderful synchronicity, Robert, because March 3rd that's the day that Helen Keller and Annie Sullivan met. So that's our special celebration with the collaborative. And I
My
was
goodness,
born in 19. And I love your trinity. I love your trinity of Christianity and philosophy and the Grateful Dead. It does feel like a be love, be honest, be useful. And I often think about music and concerts, these experiences we create together as, yeah, that loving community. And that's such a
that's the end
important
result
part.
of the goal. And so the Grateful Dead provided a little semblance of that within American culture. And it was, and most people hearing this know by now, since Bob Weir died by such a big hullabaloo, it was more than a band. It's more than a rock band, trying to sell records and fill up the concert halls.
your bringing of that music to conventions created community. I think that's a missing piece of some of our conventions lately. But dancing together with people of all ages and backgrounds it was a very living time for me. It was definitely probably a part of what helped me walk my path to ordination was, "Oh, I like this. I like this church. I like this community. I like this creativity and playfulness," you know?
Well,
There's something about that.
as I've told my fellow Detsu co-leaders, Paul Martin and Lon Elmer, I can't do this alone. And so for a while, that's really what was happening. I was putting this thing together at the shows of hosting the meetings and then putting the band together because Paul and Lon are kind of laid back, if you know what I mean. And if nothing happens, nothing happens, and that's okay. And that's fine. So I was kind of motivated, and other members of Dead Sue did not sort of step up as I entreated them over the years. So that's why it faded. I took a break from ministry in 2007 or 8. And around that same time, I contracted Raynaud's disease living in Boston, and it got too cold. So I was again displaced, sort of like when God says to Abraham, just pick up everything you got and I'll show you where you're going. He says, what are you talking about? So I called up a friend in West Hollywood who said, come on out. You can stay on my couch. You're good at sleeping on couches, he said. And and of course, I woke up the day, I remember that day too. I'm good with dates. That was September 14th, 2008, the day of the big Wall Street crash. And I learned that my pension had dissolved from the loss of about 45% of its value. And here I was in LA with no job, no car, and no place to live. And that was 2008. And I had just sort of left ministry. So there wasn't any opportunity out here anyway at the time. So I would have had to find some other work, which I eventually did. And then to wrap it up, well, to go quickly back, after I graduated seminary, no one would hire me. So I ended up getting the Portland church, which was an empty building. Apparently, I had some kind of reputation even before I graduated because I applied at 5 different churches and they all said, no, thank you, but good luck. Thanks for applying. So I couldn't figure that out. But I went to Portland and found an empty building and built it up to what you can remember and
Yeah.
even now still going. And then I got a call to New York City and I was there for 15 years. That was I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because that was a bit of a struggle. Their previous minister had been there for 30 years. It was kind of a small insular group that was reluctant to grow, to take the steps needed to grow. And we went back and forth on that. So I left there in 2003, went back to Boston, worked in a mental health facility for 4 years with serving 3 group homes, sort of one big house and then 2 satellite apartments, serving 35 adults with moderate to severe psychiatric diagnosis. And I ended up being in charge of medication administration. So every morning I would sit down in front of a filing cabinet filled with medications, get out the book and call them in one at a time and hand them a stack of pills. It was very thought provoking because you think, well, medication, but then you realize no, without medication, they're having a worse time than with it. And so working with those folks was a real education. I grew to love them, but also to worry about them and care about them and wonder what could I possibly do and the limits of our ability to help certain people. Sort of happy that some sort of patience or humility. And then after 7 years in West Hollywood, I got a call from the Wayfarers Chapel, moved down here to San Pedro and worked at the chapel for, I guess, 9 years. And I thought, this is finally, comfortable and good. And I'm able to do my ministry. And God said, oh, by the way, I'm taking the chapel away. I'm going to destroy the chapel.
You've had
Not one.
quite a few you've had quite a few thresholds like this in
I have
your
a
story.
in my little bio that keep writing. I have a thing called history of displacement, where something happens, and all of a sudden it says what you had is gone. I'll get very personal here because my first serious relationship that did work for close to 4 years ended abruptly one day. Just shut down. It happened to be the 3rd week of our we got an apartment and a 1-year lease, and 3 weeks later, it was over. I had to move out. This happens to me all the time.
Interesting. And in those moments of displacement, what do you remember your state of mind or state of being? Do you freak out? Do you roll with it? Do you go
Only
into
thing that
philosophy?
not about
What's helped
the
you through
apartment
those
thing, but
moments?
that relationship was pretty hard to let go of. But I
Yeah.
have another example that's a sort of a microcosm. I go to the seminary for that first semester they give me, and I'm driving my old Mustang back and forth from Cleveland Circle to the school. I get a job in Newton at a factory, so I have to still pay my rent. And I'm driving home from the school, and I said, I'm not going to go home right now. I'm going to head down to Star Market and get something for lunch or dinner, bring it to the job for my night job. So I continue down Beacon Street. Now you probably know this, maybe not. Beacon Street is a street in Boston. It's divided by trolley tracks. The trolleys run down the middle of the street. So here I'm approaching a crossing. There's a trolley car stopped on my left. A guy is going to make a U-turn with a big station wagon, and he pokes the nose of his station wagon out to see if there's anybody coming. I was already there, and that engine's crumpled up, and everything in the car went flying, including my new Bible I just broke. And my first thought, I said, boy, because I had been trained. See, I'm trying to train myself. I said, boy, this material world really likes to move itself around. You never know what to do next. And just to add
It
insult to
really
injury,
does.
to show how much fun my life is, we get out of the car, the cops come, we exchange the license and information, and the cop is looking at the other guy's license. And he says, you're Jim's son. And he says, yeah, Jim's my dad. He says, oh, how's he doing? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay. This guy could drive away. His front fender was damaged. My car was totaled in the middle of Beacon Street. And the cop says to me, you better get this thing out of here. You're going to get a ticket. And the second time my car was totaled, not far from there, but many years later, it was not my stop at a red light. A guy crashed into the back of me with a station wagon, broke my axle. Car's undrivable. Car's totaled. Cops come. They say no fault insurance. So this guy drives away, and I'm standing there with next to my car on the side of the street. And all of a sudden, I feel a few drops. And yes, it starts to rain heavily. So, throw at me whatever you want.
Sure, sure. And life does throw things at us. And you've been around a while, so you've had things thrown at you. Does that feel like an essential part of the spiritual path is kind of riding with the stuff that gets thrown at us?
Exactly. And it brings me to a point which you won't be fully in favor of. I have noticed that when things work out in our favor, we talk about providence or serendipity or God. Oh, but God's on my side to how that worked out. And then when things work out miserably poor, we rarely say, it's okay, it's God's providence. Work with this now. So, and it brings me to another point where we might diverge. For a long time, Eric Allison was big on this, heaven on earth. What does that mean? Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And a lot of people think that we can somehow create a utopia where everybody's getting along, thriving, playing by the rules, helping each other out. But I think heaven on earth is different from heaven in heaven. Heaven on earth is the presence of divine love and wisdom in the midst of ongoing suffering and injustice. The poor you will always have with you. There'll always be something for us to do. Is another way to put it. There are billions of propriums running around loose, and there's more born every day. And chances are 50-50, those propriums are being abused or misused to further selfish ends. And so I like to think that right now there's a baby being born, not quite a tabula rasa, blank slate, but pretty much open options and potential. And there's no way to tell or predict or control whether that little baby will grow up to be self-centered or generous. And there's all the millions of factors that will contribute to that formation. So I pretty much resigned to the fact that this is a world of constant struggle. And that would be overwhelming if we didn't know that it's not just up to us.
Sure.
Fate of the
I don't
world
know
is
that
not.
I disagree with you. I don't know that I necessarily disagree with you on both of those counts. I think it's harder to sit with, oh, this is providence when things are hard. But certainly there have been times in my life where I've gotten through something very hard and I've been able to see the way that even that really difficult experience paved the way for some growth or learning. Yeah, I don't think providence is only when things are rainbows and butterflies.
Well, we have this tendency to define things as good or bad. Whereas Shakespeare said nothing's good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It's hard to maintain that neutral position.
Yeah, it all is what it is. I like the Zen proverb, right? The barn burns down, new better view of the moon. Like we just don't quite know what the actions will lead to.
Well, now I remember what I was about to say. Lee Wolfen
Okay.
had reminded us. He said, the reason we can't see providence working, we can only see it in retrospect, is because if we knew what God was up to, we would revolt 100%. We would be outraged. Say, no way. You're not going to do that to me. And so we're focused on the smaller picture, and he's got the bigger one in mind. And that's, again, a call for humility and the awareness, to the acceptance of our intellectual limits. Can't understand it all, figure it all out, have all the answers.
Where does that play out for you, those intellectual limits? I mean, it's such an intellectual tradition that we have in Swedenborg's writings, and it's a philosophical one, which
Well, yeah.
calls us to be vigilant to the truth.
Well, I gave a lecture almost 2 years ago now at Freiburg on truth. And I tried to make the point that the common parlance is to talk about absolute versus relative truth, and that both of those miss the point entirely and send us down rabbit holes. Because obviously, everyone will admit no one has the absolute truth except God. And when you say relative truth, uh, that opens the door for pure or mere subjectivity. Something's true simply because I say it is, or I believe it to be true. So I came up with these brilliant phrase, partial truth. We all have some aspect of truth that we've been working on, that we're given. And the question is, do we nurture that and cultivate it step by step? Always more to learn, but always more learning to happen in the present moment. So again, it's a very much a both and approach. That no, we don't have the absolute truth, but we're not limited in individual silos where my truth is true for me, but not for anyone else. One leads to a forced unity where everyone believes an absolute truth, and the other is to a diversity that is not connected.
Yeah. I like that. It reminds me, I often think of all the people in the world to be kind of have a different window into the realm of God. And so we we can learn from each other because we can see if someone can share what they see, we know what's in our window. Maybe it will lead us somewhere.
But, well, the trick is to remember that what we're looking out of our window is just one view. It's not the reality. It's not the truth. And to get to the truth of our situation requires enormous, again, patience, humility, listening, as well as contributing. I mean, because again, this quest for the final or absolute truth is just so strong. And to think, from an existential point of view, that no, we only have our world to live in. Each individual's world is unique to them. That's why when the Jewish tradition, they say when a person dies, an entire world vanishes. Because we all have an idea of the world. We talk about France, and the ocean, football games, and so many things that we know about. But my world is unique to me. I know so many things that you don't know, and vice versa. And that's true for everyone. So again, the trick is to remember that it's just our world. It's a view that we have that is sufficient for us to make a connection between God and our neighbor. And we don't need to get too excited either way that, yeah, this is the real truth, or no, I'm lost in subjectivity. It's a balance.
When you look at your path in ministry and your work in churches and just all the things you've done and your experience playing music, what are the things that help us to find each other in our different worlds? Like what have been some of the things you've been a part of or helped to create that have really where you feel like, oh, okay, it's not heaven on earth yet, but we're doing something that is bringing us unity or love or helping truth to be experienced? What are the things that help that? And I guess I'm sort of getting at, to me, that's what church is. Church is when we come together and we something more happens that wouldn't have happened if we were by ourselves. Where two or three are gathered, right? Like what have been some of the highlights in your life around that experience?
Well, as you know, I'm a bit old school, and one of the things that got into the church was not only picking up some very interesting books and having some very interesting discussions, but Reverend Will Rice, who was the minister at this chapel when I started going there, he gave great new church sermons. And I'm one of the few people who actually enjoy new church sermons in that fashion.
And
And
why don't you define for our listeners what is a new church sermon at
oh,
that? How
that's
would you define that?
that it will be biblically based, and it will have a strong emphasis on Swedenborg's interpretation of that Bible text, bringing it to individual life. And, basically, Swedenborg was a spiritual psychologist, and he was talking about what's going on in your mind. He was fine leaving us to our doctors to take care of the body. You would think true about that, but he wasn't interested. He said, how does the mind work? How is it structured? What are some of the opportunities the mind presents, and what are some of the traps? So this is why I enjoyed that approach to sermons, and I wanted to do the same. So that's what I did in Portland. Now, George Dole told me when I was in seminary, I forget how this came up, but at some point he said, his father took him aside. He said, how do you grow the church? He said, it's simple, preach the doctrine. And that word, there's a trigger word right there. Doctrine. People hear doctors. Oh no, they tell me what to think or what to do. Well, you know what doctrine means, right? The word
I do tell me your definition.
teaching. You indoctrinate someone. You teach them. You lead them into the doctrine or the teaching. And so I'm not afraid of being taught. In fact, I love it. Again, getting back to something earlier, Socrates once said, if a day goes by and a friend has not corrected me of some error, I consider it a waste. So again, be open to new truths all the time. So George Old's father said, preach the doctrine, which became part of my motto. And this worked well for me in both churches because people liked my sermons. I've always heard, I must admit, I'm health, healthfully proud about that.
Well, and if it was something that spoke to you and that fed you, and then you were able to feed others with that same modality, that makes sense.
Well, you had a series a couple weeks ago on treasure and vessel. And
Yes.
I, my take on that, the church's vessel is the doctrine. The Bible, Swedenborg writes, the treasure is the inner sense that lies within the literal sense. And Swedenborg is a helpful key to getting to that. And once you do that, as Helen Keller said, he didn't make a new Bible. He made the Bible all new. And so for me, reading the Bible as a Swedenborgian is very similar to that moment in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy walked out of the Kansas house into Oz. You see, that's our treasure, and we keep it buried to some extent. And that's nobody's fault but the individuals. Everybody in this church is invited to explore the writings and explore the inner sense. Not a lot of people, I'm surprised, are not interested in that. And they want what you were talking about before, church as community, a gathering place with friends where they can feel safe and sort of apart from the world. And I'm not a big fan of that. I think, as you mentioned, churches everywhere because we are. Okay, and that brings me to the second treasure and vessel. I'm a vessel. My proprium is a vessel. Things I know about, care about, all the things I hate, would rather disappear. I mean, all of these things. Inside of that is forming a spiritual identity that will continue when the proprium is fading away, or has faded away. And so, again, the trick is to focus on the inward portion, to not get by the proprium. The proprium is the most cunning and subtle creature in the garden, and it will use truth and lies to get its ways. It will make you feel extra proud. And if you do something right and cut you off from others, make them less than, or it makes you feel very ashamed if you did something wrong, worthless. And it loves the extremes.
You said earlier about how you don't perceive that the world will ever become a a paradise, that heaven will never come fully on the earth. And our proprium, as long as it's playing its game, is never going to be heavenly. It's never going to be, it's still going to be playing this game of superior, inferior, better, worse. So maybe heaven will never fully manifest here. And yet, as we go through this journey of regeneration and get more in touch with our soul self, and we can choose it. We can choose to even have that heavenly intention, even as we're surrounded by hell. Even as the proprium continues to do what it does.
Well, it's like that little message you put on the bottom of your emails. Heaven is not located on high, but where the good of love is, and this resides within a person, wherever they may be.
Yeah, that moves me, and it's very connected to what you shared earlier in this conversation, that first realization that of the importance of people, of human people, and the sacredness of that embodied self.
Yeah.
I know for myself, especially with the rise of AI and technology, it feels like more and more it's so vital to honor the human person in front of you, right? Really listen to and honor our unique experience of God and one another.
Until people start regenerating, right? Real life is really tough. So you see this escape into the screen, and now AI and virtual reality and anything but reality, the real thing, because that's it's what they say at the two things you don't talk about at cocktail parties: politics and religion, right? Why? Because you can't talk about those things without revealing who you really are.
And those are the things that are real. Those are the things that really have an impact on how we live and why we're living and what we care about. And it does to me feel like that's part of, at least that's part of my call to be a minister, to be a part of the church, is we need that realness. I think there's a little more yearning for that realness at the same time that there's a pull to the distraction and the little videos, and there's also a desire for more realness, and a need for it.
As we pendulum in one direction, it will find its way to move
It will.
in the other opposite direction for sure. But it's always swinging back and forth because we're alive,
It is.
changing.
It is. Well, at this point in your pendulum swing of life, what's what's calling you right now? What's stirring your heart at the moment in terms of your interest or your ministry, your work, your life, your creativity?
The ministry is pretty nil. There is the
Yeah,
garden church, but I don't participate too much because again, the style of worship and is not my style at all.
not your style. Yeah,
And I think it's a legitimate thing for people to say, come to church, say, no, I don't like this church. You can't force
sure.
yourself to like something.
Mhm.
And they're doing great work. It's very much a service ministry, and they're dealing with a lot of folks who need a lot of help. And they're into nature in the garden. I am not. I was happy to become part of the legacy fund at the New York Church when the New York Church was sold, which you know all
Mhm.
about. And we also made a
Yes.
grant to the Garden Church as well. So I'm happy to
Mhm.
do, you know, down the line to be of some service to
Mm.
them. But right
Yeah.
now, no, listen, I'm 73. I've been waiting to enjoy retirement. I ordered the rocking chair a few weeks ago, and I relish the fact I don't feel the need to keep working all the time. I have Social Security, which I is a godsend, and everybody tells me, "No, it's part of life, so just relax and enjoy it." And I'm active with the Chicago Swedenborg Library. Give a lot of I used to give more talks, but now Del Rose is there, and he's going a week with some new project. I'll be at convention this year, although I'm reluctant to go for several reasons, but I'm doing a mini course on one of my true key passions, talking about what turns me on, church state issues,
Yeah.
religious
And
liberty.
that is the other area that I see your efforts a lot, is through the Social Justice Committee and Christian nationalism and
Yeah,
all of
this is
those
the
issues. Those are,
extreme danger at this point. And if you're watching the news, it's growing. It used to grow arithmetically, then it started to grow geometrically. Now it's growing exponentially. Every day there's things. Prayer at the Pentagon, troops being told that winning the Iranian war will hasten the second coming, all kinds of things. So that's really my passion. I've been trying to wake up the church to become it with social justice issues since the 90s and always get a resistance, hesitancy, and charge, no, that's too political. To which I often say, you're not political enough. And so that's what I continue to do. Now, I stepped aside from the Social Justice Committee so that it could grow because I have become a bit of a gadfly in the denomination. Right? People see me, oh no, what's he going to do now?
Sometimes I think the denomination is just full of gadflies. I feel like everyone has that perception that they're kind of on the outside. And I'm just sort of like, well, who's on the inside? I don't know. I'm glad you're a gadfly, Robert, and I'm glad you're doing that what you're doing because I don't get the sense that we really know what we're doing. So
Well, yeah, though you've said that before, and I don't understand that. We have these doctrines which say, life is not what it appears to be. It's certainly not what the traditional church says it is. It's a
mhm.
much more vibrant thing. If you look at all the people that we talk about being influenced by Swedenborg. I just learned about Walt Whitman's intense involvement with Swedenborgian ideas, and Emerson, and William Blake, and Helen Keller, and T.D. Suzuki, so many others. And they say, no, you've got a treasure here. This is phenomenal. This is revolutionary. What are you doing with it? Well, and you've been concerned about this, adopting the older forms. I don't think the older forms are really to blame. I think it's the content. Getting back to treasure and vessel will come to church. What do they find? Vapid theology. Everybody can believe whatever you want. It's all going to work out fine. We're verging on prosperity gospel with our optimism and good feelings. Form and content, vessel and treasure. Everybody likes a cup of coffee. You're probably more into tea, right?
No, I'm a coffee drinker for sure.
Okay. You like a cup of coffee. Now, would you like some
Yes,
coffee without a cup?
definitely not.
Would you like a cup without coffee? No. No. The tension between form and content is, again, it's a ploy of the proprium. You can't have an external without and vice versa. So you got to have a church building for people to gather in, because this is my personal opinion. Gathering on Zoom is not the same as being in the room. I could make that into a little meme or something. But this what brings people together is interpersonal contact, and the church provided, but not just a social club. It was also for people who are searching and very intentional about finding the meaning and purpose of life, and not satisfied with some more simplistic reduction that you get in many other
Yeah,
places. So we've
sure.
got this enormously exciting treasure of the inner sense, and that read the Bible as talking to us, not from long ago. Right now, we're going through these symbolic transitions and challenges. And so that to me is the treasure of the church. And that's been neglected for quite some time. And that's why people feel lost. What are we doing? Well, if you're not doing that, I don't know what you're doing. And I wouldn't know why you'd be attracted to this organization.
So that would be your hope for the church would be to get back to is it back to the biblical study? Is it back to the worship services, the sacraments? What would you
It
like
would
to
get
see
back to
more of?
the project of personal growth.
Mhm.
Most people think, I'm okay. It's these people or this part of the world that needs fixing.
Yeah.
And if you ask me, I have plenty of ideas how to fix other people. But very few people
Yes.
will repent and say, no, no, I've got some work to do on the inside.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what Gurdjieff called it, the work, right? We call it spiritual
Mhm.
growth. And it needs to be intentional. It doesn't happen on its own. It does plants grow without even thinking about it. But if we're not thinking about it, we won't grow. And growth means change, and change means moving from shallow beliefs, more intentional understandings, more compassionate, all these things that we preach about and that are in the Bible that Jesus was living for. Um, so what do we get back to? We get back to spiritual growth, and spiritual growth is the work. Now we have think of the church as a workshop with a whole lot of tools, and you can go to this workshop and work on your spiritual growth in ways that you can't in other settings. You don't have the right tools there. We got great tools. We cannot force people. use them or to, chisel themselves into something new. They're going to be helping other people out to change. But that's
Mm.
what the church is all about. And, so I wouldn't want to get tied down with the list of do you need these things or these? It's whatever works. But I'm
Mhm.
telling you, you look over the centuries, over the decades, you look around at what other projects are working, and we're not going to appeal to most people. The people who find the evangelicals attractive to sit in a megachurch and listen to some guy rave for an hour, like I like to call it, the emotional retelling of the old stories. Can you imagine the fear that Jacob was feeling? Here he had lost all his things. He sent ahead his, and go on and build up this old story, this very short story that teaches a spiritual principle about how we move from natural life to spiritual life, how we reclaim our identity. So, no, our church is not for everyone, but for people like me, I'm really glad it exists.
Yeah. Sounds like I'm too. I am too, and it sounds like this church has spoken to you in a way that no other church would, and I think I live in that category as well. I wouldn't have followed this path to ministry in any other community, and I'm just so curious with all that we face and with all the challenges that we're in, what what is emerging if providence is in this moment with all of its ups and downs, where is the new church emerging? And I think there's a lot. I know you don't like Zoom. I appreciate you having this conversation with me in this virtual setting. It's obviously not ideal. I wish we could all transport to a physical location to be together, and it is a powerful technology to hear each other's voices even from far away and have a little more intimacy than in a chat room or just through kind of text exchange, which I find to be moving.
Well, also, you're in a room, you're the 12 people in a circle, and you start
Yeah.
discussing things. People can chime in very easily with a small point or something. Do it on Zoom, and all of a sudden everybody shuts up because the conversation is not casual. It's very electronic, and you don't know what other people are thinking or doing, and it's
Yeah.
it's, it's so different.
It is different. There are pros and cons to both. I like to think about the Zoom. I think it does make it accessible to people. So there is a threshold that people don't have to cross in the same way to kind of walk into a new building. But those thresholds can be very powerful, like it was for you when you walked into the bookstore in Newbury Street, and having that place and that person was meaningful to you. And I
They're
I
still
honor
walking.
that.
They were still walking into the Chicago bookstore, although it's on the
Yep.
17th floor, and they're coming back
Yeah.
and they're finding themselves interested
Yeah.
in signing up for things. So if you have that physical
Yeah.
space, I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah.
And not
Yeah.
just to have a showcase for weddings, which is what Wayfarers is headed toward. Um, and we do have some churches that are still operating. Now, what Rich Topple did in Washington is brilliant, and I wish I
Hmm.
had had the backing and the sense to do something like that in New York back in the early 2000s. Sell the church, and with the proceeds, buy a Swedenborg house, a
Yeah.
large
Yeah.
brownstone that accommodates a lot of things. Um,
Yeah.
so,
Lots of
but again,
possibilities.
getting back to this about being useful, Zoom
Hmm.
can be useful if it's used right. In person meeting, same thing. So all of these things have their use, and you reminded me to back off on this either or. Um, and everything can be used wrongly. So there's an
Yes.
opportunity to be spiritually awake at every moment
Yeah.
and
There
realize,
is. There is. No matter what's happening, whether your car is getting totaled or you're sleeping on a couch or you're leading a congregation, God is moving in it. Well, I appreciate your time, Robert, and I hope this won't be our last conversation, because I do
yeah,
see the Helen Keller Collaborative as a space to really have these spiritual, political conversations. Because for
mhm.
her, those two were not separate; they were connected. And I do feel like I want to see that stream be nurtured into the future of whatever the Swedenborgian movement will be. So perhaps you'll join me.
That gets back to the business we were discussing earlier about the church's involvement with social justice issues.
Yeah,
It's very reluctant, and it does not see the connection. But if anybody attends my mini course at convention this year, they will have it spelled out very clearly.
excellent. Well, I will put that on my calendar, and we'll put a little blurb in the podcast when we put it out, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Okay. Well,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me, and be well.
Thank you. Be well too.